Imagine waking up this morning and finding your neighbor dead in the street, not from war, not from famine, just dead, face down, skin blackened, swollen lumps the size of eggs bulging from his neck. And by nightfall, his wife is the same. And by the next morning, 3 more. You don't know what's killing them. The doctors don't know. The priests don't know. The king doesn't know. You only know one thing. It spreads, and it's coming for you. Welcome to Europe in 1347, the year the Black Death arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. I'm your well-wisher, and today we're stepping inside a single day during the most catastrophic pandemic in human history. We'll follow the streets, the homes, the hospitals, and the human beings trying to survive the UN survivable. This isn't just a history lesson. This is what it actually felt like to be alive and terrified of dying in medieval Europe. Before we follow a day inside the plague, we need to understand the world it entered. Because 1347 Europe was not some primitive, lawless wasteland, it was alive. Towns like Florence, Paris, and London were bustling commercial hubs, full of merchants, scholars, craftsmen, and churches that rivaled the grandeur of anything built before. The population of Europe had been growing for nearly 3 centuries. People woke before sunrise. The baker was already at work. The blacksmith's hammer rang out. Children chased dogs through narrow alleyways, thick with the smell of bread, animals, and open sewers. Life was hard, yes, but it had rhythm. It had meaning. It had community. Then, in October of 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the port of Messina in Sicily. The sailors on board were dying, covered in black boils oozing blood and pus. Delirious with fever, faces sunken and grey, the port officials ordered the ships to leave immediately, but it was too late. Something had already come ashore, something silent, invisible, and merciless. The bacteria, Yersinia pestis, had arrived. And it had 3 forms of attack. Bubonic, which infected the lymph nodes and caused those horrifying swollen lumps called buboes. Pneumonic, which infected the lungs and spread through the air. Septicemic, which poisoned the blood directly and was almost always fatal within hours. Modern historians estimate that by the time it was done, the Black Death had killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population, possibly more. Some regions lost 80%. To put that in context, if something like that happened today, it would be equivalent to erasing the entire populations of the United States and Canada combined. It is early morning in Florence, Italy. The year is 1348. The plague has been here for months. The streets that were once crowded with merchants and children are now nearly silent. Doors are bolted, windows shuttered. The only sounds are the slow groan of a cartwheel and the grim call, "Bring out your dead, bring out your dead." This was real. Cart drivers, many of them convicted criminals, offered pardons in exchange for doing this horrific work, moved through the streets at dawn to collect the previous night's dead. They wore masks filled with herbs and flowers, believing the plague was spread by bad air, what they called miasma. They were wrong about the cause, but they weren't entirely wrong that something was in the air. Now imagine you are a young merchant. You wake up, you reach for your wife, and she's burning. Fever so bad her skin feels like hot stone. You check under her arms, her neck, her groin, and there it is, a lump, tender, swollen, dark, a bubo. Your stomach drops. You know what it means. You've known what it means for months. Do you call for the doctor? They're barely coming anymore. Too many of them are dead. Do you call for a priest? They're dying too in record numbers because they keep going to the sick to administer last rites. Do you run? If you run, you might spread it, and you might already have it yourself. Giovanni Boccaccio, an Italian writer who survived the plague, described scenes so horrific that he said the dead were treated not as human bodies but as goats. People abandoned their own families. Parents left children. Children left parents. Because love itself became dangerous. By midday, the city's physicians are making their rounds, and here's where history gets absolutely fascinating. Because the doctors of 1347 were not quacks, they were educated men. Many had studied at universities in Bologna and Paris. They had read the ancient Greeks. They had theories. They were just catastrophically, fatally wrong about almost everything. The iconic plague doctor costume, the long black robe, the wide-brimmed hat, the terrifying beaked mask, wasn't just for show. The beak was stuffed with herbs, straw, and flowers, lavender, peppermint, rose petals. The theory: the plague was in the air, and breathing sweet smells would purify and protect. Wrong. But actually, accidentally, it may have helped slightly, not because of the herbs, but because the mask created a small physical barrier between the doctor's face and infected patients. Cure 1. Lance the buboes. Cut them open and drain them. This was agonizing and often spread infection further, but occasionally it relieved pressure and a patient would survive. Cure 2. Bloodletting. The idea was to drain the corrupt blood from the body. This weakened patients who were already dying. Cure 3. Apply a live hen to the bubo. Let the hen absorb the poison. This was totally useless. Cure 4. Drink your own urine twice a day. Also useless but widely practiced. Cure 5. Sit between two large fires. The heat was believed to drive out the poison, often fatal on its own. Cure 6. Pray. This one at least gave comfort. Even if it didn't cure, the church was equally desperate. At first, priests threw themselves into care for the sick and died in enormous numbers. In some regions, over half of all clergy were dead by 1349. Some church leaders blamed sin. Others blamed Jews, leading to horrific pogroms across Germany and France. Thousands of Jewish people were massacred based on accusations that they had poisoned wells. It was scapegoating at its most murderous, and it happened in city after city. And then there were the flagellants, groups of people who marched from town to town, publicly whipping themselves bloody in acts of extreme penance. They believed God had sent the plague to punish humanity, and that by suffering publicly they could appease his wrath. They traveled across Europe in great processions, drawing crowds of thousands and spreading the plague wherever they went. It is evening now in our plague-struck city. The cart has made its rounds. The church bells have tolled again and again and again, until some towns had to ban the ringing of bells entirely because the constant sound of death was destroying what remained of people's will to live. So how did people actually survive this? Not just physically, but mentally. Some retreated into wild excess. Boccaccio described how some citizens chose to drink heavily, enjoy life to the full, go round singing and merrymaking. If you're going to die anyway, why not live? Others became extraordinary in their compassion. The town of Ragusa, modern-day Dubrovnik, invented something remarkable. They required arriving ships and travelers to wait for 30 days before entering the city. They later extended it to 40 days. 40 days in Italian is quarantina. That is where the word quarantine comes from. Think about that. In the middle of absolute medieval chaos, with no germ theory, no microscopes, no understanding of bacteria at all, human beings figured out through sheer observation and logic that isolation was the key. And they gave the world a word and a practice we still use today. There were nurses and caregivers who stayed at the bedsides of the dying, knowing it might kill them. There were ordinary men and women who dug graves day after day when the professional gravediggers were dead. There were parents who chose to stay with their sick children rather than flee. History remembers the horror, but it should also remember this: the stubborn, furious, tender persistence of human beings who refused to stop caring, even when caring could kill them. Night has fallen on our city of 1347. The day is over. More people are dead than yesterday. But here is the extraordinary counterintuitive truth about the Black Death. Out of its catastrophic devastation came some of the most profound transformations in human history. With so many dead, the feudal system began to collapse. Peasants who survived suddenly found themselves in demand. They could demand higher wages. They could leave their lords. Centuries of rigid social hierarchy began to crack. The church, which had failed so visibly, unable to explain the plague, unable to stop it, losing half its clergy, never fully recovered its absolute authority over European life. This loss of trust helped plant the seeds of the Renaissance and eventually the Reformation. Doctors, embarrassed by their total failure, began to question ancient authorities like Galen and Hippocrates. Why just trust old books? Let's actually look. Let's actually study bodies. Let's actually observe. This empirical impulse helped birth modern medicine and, perhaps most powerfully, a new emphasis on the individual. When you have watched everyone you love die, you stop waiting for institutions to save you. You start thinking for yourself. You start creating. You start asking why. The Renaissance, with all its art, its literature, its science, its rediscovery of human dignity, may never have happened without the Black Death forcing Europe to rebuild itself from the ground up. Out of the worst thing that had ever happened to the Western world came eventually one of its greatest flowerings. The people who lived through 1347 had no idea what was coming next. They just knew they had to make it through today, and somehow, enough of them did. If you found this video valuable, please consider subscribing. We cover history's most dramatic moments in exactly this kind of depth every week. Drop a comment below. What aspect of the Black Death shocked you the most? I read every single one. And if you want to go deeper, our video on the Great Plague of London is right here. Same depth, same commitment to getting the story right. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.